Welcome, everyone. Please have a seat if you would. Welcome. Wonderful to see you all here in person and the many people who are online, Zooming with us or watching via Wisconsin Eye. I want to welcome you to this event titled The Fragility and Performance of Democracy in the United States, Taking Stock After the First 100 Days of the Trump Administration. The event is co-sponsored by the Elections Research Center and the Department of Political Science here at UW-Madison. I'm Barry Burden. I'm a professor in political science and director of the Elections Research Center. And we have a terrific lineup, I'll just tell you, of really smart, insightful experts on US politics who are here to talk to us about our current situation in politics and how it relates to the ongoing situation in our politics. We are not all going to be in agreement about the diagnosis or about the prognosis, but I think we're going to learn something today together, and we might even change our minds about some of it. So thank you for being part of this conversation today. So having the floor, I'm going to make some opening comments, and I get to do it without taking any questions from the audience. So you just have to listen. After that, I'll talk about how today's going to operate, the rules of the road, and what you should expect to see for the rest of the day. So thanks for being with us. So let me first talk about the scene that we're in. This is close to the 100-day mark of the Trump administration. We're just about there. This is a natural time to size up a new presidential administration. It's become a historic milestone or yardstick to look at a new president at this point. That standard was set by Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he took over the presidency in 1933 in the midst of the Great Depression. And it was a term that he coined for the flurry of legislation that happened at that time to deal with the financial crisis. But he was referring to 100 days of congressional action. It was 100 days of legislation, not from the beginning of his term, but from the beginning of Congress acting on the things that he was proposing to them. This presidential administration is not like that. So there are some fundamental differences. We started planning this event before we knew who the president would be in early 2025. I think we started planning the event before we knew even who the Democratic nominee would be. We still thought Joe Biden would be the candidate on that side of the aisle. So it was always going to be a time to look at the state of our democracy and reflect on some of the things that are happening. We could not have anticipated the turmoil and the action that's been happening these first 100 days, the deconstruction of federal agencies, the impoundment of federal funds, a record number of executive orders and executive actions that has outpaced even FDR. It has been a chaotic whirlwind of executive action. There have been, as you all know, major conflicts with the courts, the federal court system, where the administration and the DOJ department led by Elon Musk have been sued dozens of times and now are holding things in a kind of uncertain state till those legal issues are resolved. Some of those court orders have been defied by the Trump administration. This is definitely not the legislative presidency of FDR in his first 100 days. In fact, as of my last check, only 5 items had been signed into law by Donald Trump. It is not working with the legislative branch that is producing the action. It is the executive branch acting on its own. Congress has mostly been on the sidelines. So this is a story about the president and his administration, and it's not a typical one. Donald Trump is a disruptive, belligerent executive. He has done a number of things that we have not seen in the past. He has intimidated tech companies, universities, local governments, agencies, foreign leaders, law firms, and media outlets to bend to his will and serve his interests. He has implemented and unimplemented tariffs in a number of ways that are really rocking financial markets and creating uncertainty about the future. He's refusing to spend congressionally appropriated money. That's the impoundment power that was a subject of challenge during the Nixon years. He has banned the Associated Press, one of the premier national media outlets, from attending events. He has extracted funds from law firms and tech companies, about $250 million for the inauguration alone, and improved his personal wealth through issuance of a meme Bitcoin the day before his inauguration. He is suing an academic pollster who released a survey late in the campaign whose result was pretty far from the truth and one he didn't like. He has misrepresented the truth himself in small matters, misstating what the cost of gasoline is today as $1.98 in some states. It doesn't matter. And large matters, like asserting that Ukraine started the war between Russia and Ukraine, simply not true. And he's done that mostly without pushback from his fellow partisans in Washington. That's a real change. He has handed the keys to a lot of the apparatus of the federal government to a mostly anonymous team of young, inexperienced staff working under the Musk operation. And they've had access, as you're going to hear today, to databases and employment data and other kinds of things. He's also said that he's quite serious about seeking a third term. It's not merely talk. He doubled down on that commitment. There are also new immunities in place protecting the president, put in place by the Supreme Court last year when Joe Biden was still president. In that case, which was spawned by criminal charges about Trump's interference in the 2020 election and his role in the riots that happened at the Capitol on January 6th, the court's majority ruled that the president generally has immunity from prosecution while carrying out acts deemed to be an official part of the job. We don't know exactly what the borders of that are going to be, but that's a new establishment of things that can happen. At this point, about 200 legal cases have been filed against the administration in some form, to be determined. Ratings of the quality of U.S. democracy, its performance, have been in the news lately. You may have seen the NPR story and some other interviews that have happened this week of some political scientists and other experts who are surveyed by a project called Brightline Watch that has, for the last 8 years, asked experts to rate how well democracy is faring in the United States. And for the first time, and in real contrast, actually, to Trump's first term in office, there has been a severe downgrading of those estimates just in the last couple of months. There are fears by some who are leading that project that it's beginning of an authoritarian direction for American politics. Beyond the challenges of the Trump administration, I think there are other good reasons for us to have a look at American politics today. Things are not great at home. There are reasons to worry. There is declining trust among the public in a whole variety of institutions, in Congress, in police, in universities, in hospitals, in the military, in the media, in financial institutions, and in business. Public opinion surveys show lower and lower levels of confidence in those institutions. There are fewer common references and factual understandings that we share about what our world is. Evaluations of our political leaders in surveys and in voting behavior have become fairly detached from objective indicators of how things are going. Both political parties have very low approval ratings. The Democrats worse than the Republicans, but both at a low point in modern history. One of the prominent surveys of how things are going is a question asking the American public whether they think the country is headed in the right direction or on the wrong track. The right direction, wrong track question. That question has been in negative territory for about 20 years. It was back to 2008, 2009, where there was anything positive coming out of that. Approval ratings of presidents for their performance in office have been stuck at a low level now since at least the mid-2000s. Trump is starting at a low level and declining, but he's not far off from where Joe Biden was before him and where he was before that and where Barack Obama ended at the end of his term. Public satisfaction with the state of democracy, how it is performing, is also down from a majority of the public thinking that democracy was going well, they were satisfied with it, to only about a third of the public today thinking democracy is working well, and that transcends party lines and includes independents. Are there positives? Voter participation is up. Voter turnout has been high in the last few election cycles, but that is partly out of competitive antagonism between the parties that has motivated people to participate, rather than genuine enthusiasm about the democratic process. Partisan animosity is at a high point, and that is a motivator for participation, but it has these other downsides. So I do not have easy answers for how to deal with these challenges, but I'm just going to plant a seed here for you to think about the rest of today, that the solutions might lie in unexpected places, including places we think are to blame for some of our problems. And I want to mention political parties as one of those. Much of the blame for things that people think are going wrong in our politics have been put on the two parties, the Democrats and Republicans. There is certainly a lot of dysfunction in those parties and in their performance in government. There's plenty of stalemate in legislatures, in our Congress. There's a lot of posturing and a lot of manufactured polarization that's not genuine but is created for messaging, fundraising, or other purposes. And maybe it's not even the parties per se that are a problem, but these particular parties, maybe it is this Democratic and Republican Party that are the problem. But I contend that we need parties. We can't operate without them, but what we need are stronger, healthier parties that can do the things they are supposed to do, and we might also need more of them than two. Now, parties are not mentioned in the US Constitution, and our founders worried about them. They were fearful of factions and parties becoming implanted in the government and acting in a tyrannical fashion. George Washington's farewell address to the country as he left office was famously a warning about the excesses of party spirit, and he pledged for us to be moral people who would overcome the temptation to be involved in factions or parties, and to look out for the common good rather than the interest of parties. And yet those same founders who were fearful of parties very quickly formed them in the early days of the American Republic. There was no way around it. Political scientist E.E. Schatzsnyder famously said that it was impossible for us to think about a large-scale democracy without parties. They're a necessary part of the formula, so we should make them work for us rather than in ways that seem harmful. Martin Van Buren, who was maybe the principal creator of the Democratic Party, and really the inventor of the mass political party that reached out to the electorate and campaigned in the way we are familiar today, wanted those party coalitions to form around the party as a principle, not around individuals. They were not to be in service of a person, although he did find a popular war general to be his candidate for the Democratic Party. He advocated the idea that parties ought to be about bigger things than any one individual. Now, the Democratic Party is in trouble at the moment. They have lost their way. They are struggling in the face of the losses they experienced at the federal level last year. But no one can say that they're a party oriented around a person. There's no cultish attention to one individual. It's not even clear who is at the helm of the Democratic Party in the federal level at the moment. And it was never the case when Biden was in office that the party was a Biden party. It was a party that happened to have chose Biden and then Harris as its presidential nominee. And yet the Democrats were too slow in retrospect to push Biden out of the office. It even took outsiders, people not in the party, people like George Clooney and Ezra Klein and others, to start the nudging of him from office. Congressman Dean Phillips ran for president, a very quiet campaign, to challenge Biden not on ideological or party grounds, but just because he thought he was not fit for the job at his age and in his mental state. And that did nothing for Dean Phillips' career in the Democratic Party. That ended his time in the Democratic Party. And yet there are also signs that the Democratic Party was quite strong and healthy when Biden eventually stepped aside. Party insiders very quickly rallied around Kamala Harris. Within 72 hours, she became the effective nominee. And that campaign became very effective, charged, organized, all the things a party would like it to be. And yet there were many in the party who couldn't talk openly about the trouble with Biden at the helm. A stronger party organization would have worked earlier, but Biden stayed in part because he so well represented his party. His interest, his career, his policy proposals, all his time in office are all things that are right in the heart of what the Democratic Party represents. So he was no outlier. He was a good representative of the party. Trump is something else. It's a very different story on the Republican side. He is clearly an outsider, someone who did not come up through the party apparatus. That's the opposite of Joe Biden, who did nothing but work his way up through the party apparatus. Trump is unlike really any other president in the modern era. He came up through real estate, media, celebrity. These are not the usual paths to politics. And his dominance of the GOP is something else. Not that long ago, Trump was a registered Democrat in the state of New York. Not long after that, he was registered with the Reform Party in New York. I think he was an independent at one point also. He has flirted with different organizations that would meet his needs and ended up with the Republicans. He has given campaign money to Hillary Clinton and other Democrats who he has reviled in public. He's taken plenty of positions at odds with the party orthodoxy, but those are now forgotten. Elon Musk, for his part, is even more of an outsider. He's really taken good advantage in an innovative way of campaign finance laws that have allowed him to be involved in our Supreme Court race here, but also in the presidential race, pumping in about $250 million. Just say that again, $250 million through a super PAC to assist the Trump campaign, perfectly legal. There are also other outside entities that did not come up through party politics. The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, you've all heard about, was something happening outside the party apparatus. I actually attended one of their events at the Republican convention last year in Milwaukee. It was held outside the security perimeter. It was a different thing that was not part of the official RNC programming. I'm just going to contend that things happening outside the apparatus of our two parties, but then infecting them, is one of our problems. Those are one of the things we have to address. Now, the Republican Party enabled this on their side. First, in 2016, when the establishment of the party did essentially nothing to resist Trump as the nominee, although they were opposed to him. Insiders, members of Congress, governors, members of the RNC, they could have rallied around another candidate. There were plenty of them available who were regular traditional establishment Republicans: Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, Jeb Bush, Rick Perry. It's a long list of credible conservative Republicans, but there was no movement to pick an alternative to Trump. That kind of endorsement activity that happens within parties typically did not happen then. It happened again in 2024 when the party decided to back a candidate who had lost in the last election. That's a quite unusual step for a party. Typically, parties thank their candidates very much and move on to something else once they have lost a presidential election. They could have turned to a new face who was just as conservative, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, and that's what parties usually do. It looks to me like the GOP today is mostly a Trump organization. That's what I saw at the RNC. There's very little independent apparatus of a party that exists separately from what is happening around Trump. The party and the presidency have become personalistic in a way we have not seen in a very long time. Scholars, especially those who study other countries, have shown that this is one of the things that happens in declining democracies, ones that are veering towards autocracy, seen in places like Eastern Europe, in Turkey, in Poland, in Latin America, Venezuela, and other places. A 30-year study of democratically elected leaders in a book by Franz, Kendall Taylor, and Wright found that when parties became personalistic, when they were oriented around individual politicians, it tended to lead to weaker institutions, greater polarization, and degraded democracy. And they concluded that the strongman theory of politics was not successful in the long run, even if it had some benefits in the short run. But our parties actually have demonstrated the power to be constructive forces to keep themselves and democracy on the right path. They are part of the guardrails that need to be in place to keep people following the law and behaving well. The Democratic Party has at times shunned people who tried to infiltrate their side of the aisle. Bernie Sanders made 2 good runs for president in 2008 and 2020. He was eventually brought inside the party and contributed to the platform and did a variety of other things. I think now as a respected party member, but there was real resistance of establishment Democrats in handing over the keys to him as a president. Michael Bloomberg also tried to work his way into the presidential campaign in 2020, spending $1 billion on his presidential campaign, and Democrats said, no, thank you. Where they were not sure that he had the loyalty and commitment to the party or that he was the right representative of it. So parties, unlike candidates or individual politicians, are coalition builders. They're aggregators of interests and groups in the electorate. Unlike a financial group, a dark money group, say, or a super PAC, or populists or demagogues who arrive in a particular moment, parties hang around. They are repeat players who have reputations and accountability, and that's helpful. They care about the long-term health of themselves and of their government. Now, they can be enablers of bad behavior, for sure. And yet we've seen parties purge the worst elements of their coalitions. George Wallace, the racist governor from Alabama, pushed aside by the Democrats in the 60s and 70s, although he still called himself a Democrat. Republicans set aside the John Birch Society and other conspiracy theorists in the 70s and 80s who they thought were not appropriate. Republicans in the 90s and 2000s said no thank you to Congressman Tom Tancredo, who was saying and doing offensive things related to immigration. So parties have shown an ability to follow the Van Buren model of an organization devoted to principles rather than to people. Now, I run a center related to elections. I think elections are essential to democracy. There's no way to have a democracy without them. And yet what we're seeing today, one of the themes of this session is about the fragility of democracy. Elections are not going to be enough. They're not sufficient. Democratically elected leaders, we have found by watching other countries, can steer a country in non-democratic directions, even if elected in fair, legitimate, secure elections. And it's possible for parties to sink to that level as well and encourage the authoritarian direction of things, using power in government in an abusive way, in an irresponsible way when they're in power. I think we have to remember democracy does not run on autopilot. It requires tending to. And parties are some of the key groups that can do that tending for us because they are part of it. So no silver bullet, but I'm suggesting parties as a way out.